Welcome to the Urban Herald. We're the team that works to cut through all the noise and, well, deliver the essential insights you need to navigate a world that feels like it's getting more fragmented by the day.
That's right. And as we start to close out the year, our mission today is pretty ambitious.
I'd say so. We're going to give you the ultimate shortcut, a really deep dive into one of the most crucial foresight sources shaping the global landscape for 2026.
And we're starting with what many people consider, the gold standard in this kind of global forecasting, the Economist's big annual report, The World Ahead 2026.
We've spent a lot of time with this one, really distilling hundreds of pages of pretty dense analysis.
We have. And the goal was to extract those surprising nuggets,
Yeah.
the critical connections and the trends that are already building pressure just beneath the surface, but maybe haven't quite reached a full-blown crisis point yet.
Absolutely. And if we had to, define 2026 based on this report, the theme definitely isn't stability.
Not even close. It's defined by an era of what they call profound uncertainty.
And geopolitical fragmentation. And on top of all that, the inescapable, often chaotic influence of what they brilliantly term the Trumpnado effect.
I love that term. It's so
And
alive.
essentially, you have this instability at the center radiating outward, and it's disrupting every corner of the globe. I mean, from bond markets all the way to biotech labs.
That unpredictability is really the one constant. And the forecast itself, it moves beyond just simple predictions. It really focuses on answering these pivotal, high-stakes questions that are going to define global affairs for the next couple of years.
Okay, so like what? What are the big questions on the table?
Well, for instance, we have to look at the economy and ask, will the really aggressive use of tariffs finally trigger a serious, sustained economic downturn? Or is the global system just going to absorb the shock and continue its, gradual deceleration?
And that's a huge one. But crucially, we also have to look at the tech sector. Are these colossal investments in artificial intelligence? I mean, we're talking about capital flowing into the system at a rate we haven't seen since the dot-com era. Are they about to pay off with transformative, productivity-boosting breakthroughs?
Or is it the other option? Are we heading toward a spectacular, just catastrophic financial bubble? And we'll get into the alarming numbers behind that a bit later.
Right. And then there's security, which is always paramount.
Always. The question there is, can the incredibly fragile ceasefires that might emerge in places like Gaza, can they actually hold through another volatile year?
Or will these regional conflicts just metastasize and draw in wider powers, further fragmenting global stability?
But for many people, I think the most immediate economic test, the one that really defines the risk for developed nations, is when the bond markets will finally lose their patience.
And force governments to confront decades of, frankly, profound fiscal irresponsibility.
Exactly. When does that bill come due?
All of these factors, they converge into this core concept that's defining the global environment for 2026, geopolitical drift.
Yeah, that's the key phrase. We are witnessing the accelerated and probably irreversible decay of the established post-war rules-based world order. But it's not a neat Cold War division into two neat blocks.
No, it's so much messier than that. The world isn't really splitting, it's fragmenting into these shifting temporary arrangements.
And the sources refer to this as the age of transactional multipolarity, which basically means nations are prioritizing immediate gains over long-term alliances.
So they're forming these ad hoc arrangements, these coalitions of the willing, just for specific goals.
Precisely. There's no reliable anchor anymore, no stable set of rules, and that drift is the landscape we are about to navigate.
Okay, so let's unpack this. And I think we have to start where so much of this uncertainty originates in the United States.
Makes sense.
2026 is going to be dominated by a date that really should be unifying, but is predicted to be, well, anything but.
And that's America's 250th anniversary.
The semi-quincentennial of the U.S. founding. And this is not just a historical date. It is set to become a massive, contentious construction of narratives about the nation's past, its present, and its future.
The contrast with the bicentennial 50 years prior, back in 1976, it's almost heartbreaking when you look at it.
It really is. That event took place during one of the U.S.'s lowest ebbs. I mean, think about it. The nation was still reeling from Watergate.
The political trauma of Nixon's resignation, the humiliating defeat in Vietnam.
And all the lingering social wounds from the assassinations of the previous decade. Public trust was just in the basement.
It was at rock bottom. Yet, despite that deep, deep division, President Gerald Ford intentionally used the 1976 bicentennial as a massive national spectacle. It was a deliberate effort to unify.
He focused so heavily on collective achievements like the moon landing, right? Trying to manufacture this shared sense of national pride and, boost the country's image abroad.
Right. And Ford later reflected that the bicentennial effectively cicatrized the wounds of the nation. It provided a collective, even if it was temporary, moment of healing and shared identity.
That is the exact opposite of what analysts are forecasting for 2026.
The complete opposite. This time, they foresee a massive dispute of narratives, and it will likely divide the country into what the sources call irreconcilably different terms regarding what the U.S. past actually means and what its present mission should be.
And this isn't just a prediction. The political battle is already underway, particularly driven by the preparation of the current U.S. administration.
We're seeing specific documented preparation for this clash over history. The sources detail how the administration has issued executive orders specifically to audit exactly how American history is being told at federal historical sites.
And within the Smithsonian institutions, which are basically the gatekeepers of the national story.
Exactly. And the explicit objective, which is detailed in these orders, is to exalt American grandeur and actively eradicate divisive narratives.
And this is where the controversy sharpens dramatically. I mean, it's far from being just bureaucratic paperwork.
Not at all.
Yeah.
We are seeing concrete, highly controversial examples like the directive for the removal of plaques and other interpretive materials related to slavery and racial injustices from several national parks and monuments.
So actual removal of historical context.
Yes, and critics immediately labeled this as a direct attempt at historical whitewashing, an effort to surgically edit the national story to present only a sanitized, favorable version, and to minimize or just eliminate uncomfortable truths.
This battle over historical interpretation, as you note, it goes so far beyond just museum curation. It's about who gets to define the core identity of the nation.
It is.
And when we think about that, it's just impossible not to think of George Orwell's chilling observation from 1984.
Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past.
Exactly. If you can successfully redefine the foundational history of the United States, if you can convince the population that its past was fundamentally unblemished, you fundamentally shift its future direction and its moral purpose.
And the political timing could not be more highly charged.
Right. The climax of these anniversary celebrations, which will likely involve massive government-funded spectacles in July 2026.
Will be followed just 4 months later by the crucial midterm elections in November.
So every single aspect of the celebration, every parade, every national speech will be intensely politicized. It'll be used by both sides to capture and really to weaponize patriotic sentiment for electoral advantage.
It becomes part of the campaign.
So we transition from a battle over the past to what feels like an existential reckoning with the future, specifically the U.S. economy and the role of its most vital institution, the Federal Reserve. The forecast confirms that the continuation of these aggressive tariffs, which, let's be honest, we probably haven't even fully felt the economic pain of yet, will dampen global growth throughout 2026.
And that deceleration is a global projection. It's based on simple, really undeniable economic logic.
Tariffs are just taxes on trade.
They are. They're paid by importers and eventually by consumers. They make international commerce more expensive, less efficient, and they create deep uncertainty.
Which causes businesses to just systematically delay investments all over the world.
It's a drag on the system precisely when the system needs a boost.
And this projected slowdown is hitting an already precarious fiscal reality.
Oh, absolutely. The sources emphasize that rich countries across the board are living beyond their means. They're accumulating what they describe as monstrous public debts.
And we're talking about massive fiscal excess, right? Years and years of spending without raising taxes.
Which has only been tolerable because interest rates have been suppressed to near zero for so long.
Okay, so here's where the forecast gets particularly sharp because the U.S. central bank reckoning is approaching fast.
Very fast. And the crucial pivot point that could destabilize the entire U.S. economic framework is the replacement of the current Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell. His term is set to expire in May 2026.
And this isn't just routine bureaucracy. The report treats this like a political bomb waiting to detonate.
It is. And the speculation about the replacement candidate is intense. The source material highlights Chris Waller, a current Fed governor, as the most likely candidate for substitution.
And he is explicitly described as a figure aligned to Trump.
And the profound danger here, it transcends any individual monetary policy. It's about the very independence of the institution itself.
So if the president successfully installs a personal loyalist,
He then gains the ability to potentially replace other members of the Board of Governors as well, effectively placing the U.S. Central Bank under his control, or at the very least under significant political pressure.
this is a huge institutional threat. It could unravel decades of work that was aimed at insulating the Fed from short-term political demands.
Yes, and the sources warn, and I'm quoting, that threats to the independence of central banks aggravate another of the problems, the precarious situation of governmental budgets.
Let's stress that point because the potential magnitude is huge.
It is. If financial markets lose confidence that the Fed is prioritizing long-term price stability and data-driven policy over explicit political directives.
For instance, keeping rates artificially low to juice the economy right before an election, regardless of what inflation is doing.
Right. Then bond yields could spike dramatically.
That's the consequence, a sudden catastrophic loss of confidence. If investors decide U.S. debt is no longer being reliably managed, this politicization risks triggering a severe financial market showdown,
A bond market crisis.
which would instantly raise borrowing costs for everyone. The government, corporations, individual homeowners through sharply rising mortgage rates.
The whole system feels it.
The conclusion here is just stark. The future stability of the U.S. economy, whether we face a soft landing or a rapid debt-induced contraction, will be determined not just by economic data, but by who controls that Fed chair position come May 2026.
It's a monumental risk, and it's directly linked to political control.
Okay. That sets the stage for massive internal U.S. instability. Now let's widen the lens and look at that geopolitical drift outside of U.S. borders, which analysts agree is the defining characteristic of 2026 global affairs.
Right, so when we look at the world order, the predictions are really polarized. You have some analysts who see us heading straight into a new U.S.-China Cold War.
Right, a rigid division of the world into two competing economic and military blocs.
Then you have others who imagine a world divided into American, Russian, and Chinese spheres of influence, where regional great powers just dominate their neighbors.
But the economists, they reject both of those frameworks as being too simplistic.
They do. They predict something much, much messier. The accelerated decay of the old rules-based order into transactional multipolarity.
Okay, that's a mouthful. What does that actually mean?
It means that these long-standing ideological alliances are being systematically replaced by fluid, temporary deals struck purely based on immediate pragmatic or commercial concerns.
The analogy we keep coming back to is that the global game board is all messed up.
That's a great way to put it. The pieces are moving independently. Coalitions of the willing strike these temporary deals on specific issues. Maybe it's a defense pact one year, a climate agreement the next, but there is no reliable referee.
So no one to enforce new rules or consistently uphold the old ones?
Which just renders everything incredibly unpredictable for long-term planning.
And while uncertainty usually leads to stagnation, this geopolitical drift does present an odd kind of upside for certain countries.
Yeah, for the so-called middle powers. This instability, paradoxically, offers greater freedom for bilateral business for nations that are nimble enough to navigate between the competing giants.
And the sources specifically name countries like Brazil and India.
Right, who can play the U.S. and China against each other to secure better deals for themselves.
But that freedom has to be inherently risky.
Oh, incredibly risky. Without a stable, rules-based global order, it becomes far more difficult for these nations to rely on predictable trading environments or, long-term security guarantees.
So they constantly have to hedge their bets, diversifying supply chains and military procurement away from reliance on any single power.
The current environment forces self-reliance, which is expensive and difficult.
Okay, so let's focus on the sharpest point of conflict in the geopolitical sphere, Ukraine and Russia. The forecast suggests that 2026 will not bring victory or comprehensive peace.
But rather the transformation of the conflict into a permanent gray zone.
What does that look like?
Well, first look at the sheer scale of the costs. It's staggering, especially when you compare it to the minimal territorial gains. Since late 2022, despite immense resources poured into the war, Russia has only managed to conquer roughly 1% of Ukrainian territory.
1%. And the price paid has been monumental. The estimates are about 250,000 soldiers killed or severely wounded on the Russian side alone.
Just a horrific cost. And the conflict has fundamentally changed the nature of modern warfare. It's morphed into this grinding drone war on the front lines, characterized by continuous low-intensity damage.
And the sources highlight this destructive asymmetry. Ukraine has managed to disable nearly 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity by striking deep inside Russian territory.
While Russia, in return, has systematically decimated Ukraine's energy infrastructure. We're talking major power plants and gas production facilities.
And even within Russia itself, there are clear signs of strain, which is what fuels this predicted strategy.
That's right. Opinion polls are showing the Russian population is growing weary of the continuous mobilization and the daily economic burden of the war. So while officials maintain this facade of victory being imminent, the sources note that the goalposts have shifted.
And this shift is crucial. Putin's predicted strategy for 2026 is not full-scale, costly victory, nor is it peace negotiations that might require him to concede territory.
So the best strategic option for him is to freeze the active phase of the war. And this transforms it into a permanent conflict with sporadic eruptions along the heavily fortified front lines.
Can you give us an analogy for that? It's a strange concept.
Think of it less as a decisive military campaign and more like two neighbors who have been fighting over a property line for decades.
Okay.
They're not going to court, and they're not going to settle it with a real final confrontation. Instead, they just exchange threats, they patrol the fence line, they occasionally launch a minor skirmish, but the tension is unstable, intense all the time.
So the conflict is always there, simmering just below boiling point.
Exactly. And this gray zone strategy perfectly serves Putin's primary long-term strategic objective.
Because if it's not a declared war, but it's also not total peace, it ensures that Ukraine is constantly hampered.
It prevents stability. It deters large-scale foreign reconstruction investment, and it stalls any chance of meaningful integration into Western institutions like the EU or NATO.
So in this perpetual state of instability, Ukraine is just unable to achieve true recovery or win in any meaningful sense of the word.
And that perpetual instability in Eastern Europe leads us directly to a central and honestly a deeply pessimistic prediction for 2026. Massive structural problems for Europe itself.
Right. The continent is facing what the analysts are calling an impossibility trilemma,
which is a convergence of economic, climatic, and political tensions that severely risks prolonged economic stagnation.
Let's break down those pressures. First, the security burden is now overwhelming.
Russia is becoming increasingly hostile, actively probing and testing the airspace of various NATO nations, and most critically, given the predicted U.S. policy drift we talked about, the U.S. has ceased, or at least severely curtailed, its financial and military contributions to Ukraine.
So the entire burden of sustained support, which analysts agree will be required for years, now falls solely on European shoulders.
And this massive military burden hits an economy that is already structurally weak.
Europe's economic foundation is just characterized by high sovereign debts, frustratingly slow growth, and stagnant productivity.
And on top of that, the demographic crisis is a silent killer. The aging population requires immense social spending. And that's tragically exacerbated by young, skilled people migrating to centers of perceived opportunity in the U.S. or Asia.
It's a continental brain drain.
It is. And they're caught in this vicious circle. European countries desperately want to meet the NATO defense spending goal of 2% of GDP, which is vital given Russian aggression.
But they're finding it incredibly difficult to fund this necessary military buildup amid deep economic woes, high public debt, and constant demands for Social Security spending from an aging electorate. You can't do it all.
And compounding all of this is the third tension, the climate resistance. While the EU has set these ambitious, continent-leading goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition to green tech, these efforts are meeting severe, organized political resistance.
The sources point specifically to the rise of various populist and denialist parties regarding global warming.
And they're successfully mobilizing against costly environmental regulations, viewing them as obstacles to immediate economic growth.
So you've got a system that needs high defense spending, massive structural reforms to boost growth, and costly climate transition policies, all at the same time.
It's the trilemma, and the conclusion of the forecast is pretty somber. While Europe has successfully navigated existential crises in the past, the 2026 crisis is not viewed as an opportunity for growth or unification.
It's a genuine trap.
It is. Without a consensus on swift, profound structural reforms, a political will to commit sustained multi-year aid to Ukraine, and a functional climate strategy that overcomes that entrenched political resistance, the forecast suggests Europe will just spiral into a cycle of prolonged stagnation.
They simply cannot achieve all three of those crucial, expensive objectives simultaneously under the current political and economic constraints.
That's the verdict.
And that profound instability in the West, particularly in the US and Europe, brings us to the irony alert of this deep dive.
Okay.
As we pivot to Asia, The Economist predicts that 2026 will be a year of tremendous strategic opportunities for China. And the truly remarkable part
Is that these opportunities are being created, or at least massively accelerated, by the policies and the sheer unpredictability of Donald Trump.
it sounds completely counterintuitive. The man who championed America First policies and initiated the most aggressive tariff wars explicitly designed to constrain China.
Is now, through sheer inconsistency, becoming China's inadvertent strategic partner.
The analysis suggests that if Beijing executes its strategy correctly, 2026 could be the year China no longer needs the U.S. for anything essential to its future growth.
It's a stunning potential outcome.
So let's detail the three major opportunities they highlight, starting with clean technology leadership.
Right. The U.S. strategy, driven by the administration, rejects the premise of the climate crisis. It's actively cutting subsidies for crucial green technologies and insisting on prioritizing fossil fuels.
China, meanwhile, has poured staggering resources into becoming the dominant global supplier.
They control critical aspects of the supply chain for solar panels, wind turbines, and the raw materials needed for battery storage. So with the U.S. retreating from this sector and actively promoting fossil fuels, a massive leadership vacuum is created.
And this vacuum allows China to step into the negotiating room not as a competitor, but as a critical supplier and partner to countries that are serious about the energy transition.
Exactly. It creates an enormous opportunity for China to negotiate, lead, and supply other countries, particularly in the global south, that are eager to transition but lack the manufacturing base or the capital.
So China effectively owns the future of the energy transition in the eyes of many developing nations. That's a huge geopolitical win.
A massive win. And opportunity number two focuses on wooing the global south, using economic policy contrast, particularly focusing on Africa.
And the policy difference between the two superpowers here is stark and highly visible. In 2025, the U.S. applied a massive 30% punitive tariff on imports from South Africa, one of the leading economies on the continent.
China went in the complete opposite direction. They strategically granted tariff-free access to imports from 53 African nations, showcasing a commitment to open, accessible trade.
Now, African governments do sometimes express valid complaints about imbalanced commercial relations with China, right? And concerns about debt burdens, for instance.
They do, but they overwhelmingly consider China's generous tariff-free offer to be substantially better and certainly more reliable than the punitive policies emanating from the U.S.
It's a classic strategic play, while the U.S. is using tariffs as a punishment.
China is using trade as an incentive, deliberately positioning itself as the more stable, reliable, and mutually beneficial partner to the developing world. They're capitalizing on U.S. aggression.
And the third major opportunity is the rapprochement with India, a country often viewed as a crucial democratic and geopolitical counterweight to Chinese influence.
Yeah, for years, the U.S. and India enjoyed strengthening commercial and strategic ties. But that relationship suffered severely after the U.S. president reportedly underestimated the Indian prime minister.
And then imposed heavy tariffs on India, which was perceived as punishment for continuing to purchase heavily discounted Russian oil.
The strategic consequence of that is now playing out. The sources confirm that in September 2025, the Indian prime minister traveled to China for a high-level meeting with Xi Jinping.
And while no explicit defense or economic alliance has been signed yet,
Many experts now view this strategic pivot toward détente as just a matter of time, believing a closer alliance or trade pact is highly possible in 2026.
now, I have to challenge this conclusion a little bit. This analysis focuses so heavily on the instability caused by U.S. policy. But what about China's own massive internal headwinds?
That's a fair question.
Doesn't The Economist account for China's domestic property debt crisis or the massive demographic collapse it's facing? Those are huge sources of instability that could negate these external gains.
That's a vital point for nuance. And while the report does acknowledge those structural problems, especially the looming demographic crisis, the conclusion is that China's relative stability compared to the volatility of the U.S. administration is the operative factor in 2026.
That's about predictability.
Exactly. Xi Jinping's regime operates on a predictable, long-term strategic timeline, whereas the U.S. policy can shift month to month.
That makes sense. The underlying mechanism here is the same across all three opportunities. It is Trump's unpredictability and instability that inadvertently assists China.
Right. And while the Beijing leadership may have learned to manage that chaos, the ideal strategic result for them, as the sources emphasize, would be to need less of him.
By fragmenting U.S. alliances and economic consistency, the U.S. is inadvertently clearing the path for China's greater global influence.
Let's pivot now to the innovation front. This is where we move from geopolitical volatility to technological risk. And nothing in the forecast suggests more technological volatility right now than the massive, speculative investment swirling around artificial intelligence.
We absolutely need to look closely at the AI bubble watch.
The numbers are, frankly, mind-boggling. They border on the irrational.
American technology giants alone invested over $400 billion in AI infrastructure, chips, and capacity in 2025.
And projections suggest that total cumulative spending globally could hit an estimated $7 trillion by the end of the decade.
Wait, $7 trillion, is that right?
$7 trillion with a T. It's staggering.
To put that in perspective, that's almost 3 times the entire GDP of India.
Or roughly the combined annual economic output of Germany, the UK, and France. We're talking about pouring capital into one single sector at an unprecedented scale.
The question is, are we building the future, or are we just building a magnificent house of financial cards?
And here is the massive fundamental problem that justifies the bubble watch status. The return on this gargantuan investment is currently well below expected.
So all this money is going in, but what's coming out?
The actual revenue generated by commercial AI applications, things people are paying for right now, is only around $50 billion annually.
That investment to revenue ratio is alarming.
It is. This sector is currently investing approximately $8 for every $1 of revenue it generates. So the prediction for the AI market in 2026 is, therefore, not optimistic.
And we've seen this pattern repeatedly in economic history, and it rarely ends well.
Exactly. The sources offer specific historical parallels. They remind us that even genuinely useful transformative technologies, the ones that ultimately changed the world, like the railways in the 1840s or the early internet infrastructure in the 1990s,
were all preceded by these intense periods of financial euphoria that inevitably led to massive market corrections.
or outright crashes, often bankrupting the initial investors, but, leaving behind valuable infrastructure for others to build on.
But the risk today is enormous because the American economy is creating what the sources explicitly call an air bubble. It's becoming highly dependent on this massive stream of speculative AI investment to drive growth and stock valuations.
The investment itself is driving the perception of value rather than actual realized profitability.
So if the commercial returns remain low, and the data currently suggests they are, the Economist warns explicitly that this bubble will burst at any moment.
And given the volume of debt and the concentration of investment in just a few giant companies, a sudden contraction would have severe, rapid consequences for the U.S. economy. It would be amplified across supply chains and financial markets.
And it could potentially coincide with that Fed instability we discussed earlier, a perfect storm.
A perfect storm. And compounding this macro financial risk is the immediate secondary concern about AI's impact on the labor market.
Right. While previously automation was a concern for manufacturing and manual labor.
The sources note that concern about AI's impact on jobs is deepening significantly, particularly for roles requiring university degrees. The white-collar, creative, and administrative sectors that were previously thought to be insulated.
Okay, shifting to a more, let's say, grounding innovation, one that is necessary regardless of AI's performance. Let's look at a clean energy source that is finally receiving the investment and attention it deserves.
Geothermal energy.
Historically niche and geographically constrained, but it is becoming essential as a clean and constant energy source.
The key here is a technical shift, and it's drawing on decades of experience from a very different industry.
The oil and gas industry.
That's right. Companies are actively applying deep drilling techniques, the same methods they perfected, to reach deeper, hotter, dry rocks. This allows heat to be reliably extracted and converted into power.
Which makes geothermal energy deployable in far more locations than just the traditional surface-level hot spring.
And the competitive edge of geothermal is its reliability, which is absolutely critical for grid stability.
Unlike solar, which is limited to daylight hours, or wind, which requires specific weather conditions.
Geothermal can provide baseload power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a dispatchable energy source that can run continuously, stabilizing the grid against the intermittency of other renewables.
So what are the projections?
The projections based on IEA data are highly optimistic, assuming the political will and the capital are available. With the right level of sustained capital injection, geothermal could account for an impressive 15% of all energy generated globally by 2050.
15% is a huge number, but the status for 2026 is defined as promising but not guaranteed.
Yes, and the hesitation lies in the economics. Achieving that necessary scale, moving it from niche projects to a widespread reality that requires pipelines and drilling infrastructure, still requires a great investment.
And that investment is complicated by the very same economic uncertainty and fiscal woes we discussed impacting rich nations like those in Europe. It's all connected.
It's always all connected. Now, moving from energy stability to human biology, perhaps the most talked about consumer technology innovation right now is the rise of powerful weight loss drugs.
The GLP-1 agonists. The market is just booming, and 2026 is expected to be marked by the launch of a new, better version.
The sheer demand is driving incredibly rapid innovation. One of the biggest expected advancements is the arrival of oral medications pills for weight loss.
Which would eliminate the need for weekly injections and refrigerated storage.
Exactly. That's a massive logistical leap that should make the treatment significantly more practical and accessible to millions more people worldwide.
And the spotlight drug that's expected to dominate headlines in 2026 is retatrutide.
Yes. This is an injectable compound that goes way beyond current standards. It's a triple agonist, meaning it activates 3 different receptors involved in regulating appetite and metabolism.
GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon, which is why it's earned the nickname Godzilla in pharmaceutical circles.
Due to its immense power, and the initial trial results are nothing short of revolutionary.
Participants using retatrutide achieved up to 24% total weight loss in just 48 weeks.
24%. That is a truly life-changing result. It's approaching the efficacy that was previously only achieved with highly invasive bariatric surgery.
But as with all rapidly evolving technologies, the caveat section is long and necessary.
Of course, access remains a huge hurdle, as the cost of these new medications remains potentially prohibitive for most people outside of comprehensive insurance coverage.
And critically, the long-term effects are still not totally known, which creates a massive unknown for the years ahead concerning rebound weight gain or unforeseen health issues.
And the proliferation and efficacy of these drugs, it raises a profound ethical and philosophical question that we as a society have to start grappling with.
Which is using these powerful medications to alter your physical capabilities cheating?
Yes. This question takes the debate about performance-enhancing drugs, which used to be confined to elite athletes, and immediately extends it to a far wider general population group.
And that philosophical discussion is going to be forced into the mainstream in a spectacular way by a highly controversial yet highly visible new event.
The emergence of the 2026 Enhanced Games in Las Vegas.
This is a truly radical sporting event. It explicitly allows athletes to use performance-enhancing drugs legally and openly.
The whole premise is to challenge the current anti-doping paradigm and explore the absolute limit of human potential without those chemical restrictions.
The debate this event forces is so fundamental. Is chemical enhancement cheating, or is it simply a different, technologically advanced way to test human limitations and achievements?
Is it a celebration of human ingenuity, or is it the ultimate violation of the idea of fair play? The controversy will be intense, forcing society to define its values in real time.
And this ties directly back to that GLP-1 debate.
It does. Very few people ever compete in the Olympics, but potentially millions will participate in the metaphorical Ozempic Games to enhance their daily lives or reverse health issues.
And both scenarios involve using chemistry to transcend biological limitations.
So the Enhanced Games and the widespread use of these Godzilla drugs force society to ask the same overarching question. Where exactly do we draw the line on using chemistry to transcend our biological limitations, whether it's for a gold medal or just for improved health?
The answers we arrive at will reshape our fundamental perceptions of achievement and authenticity in the 21st century.
As we conclude this truly dense, deep dive, let's just take a moment to synthesize this complex global picture for 2026.
The world, according to the Economist's analysis, is facing a genuine polycrisis.
Multiple interconnected and mutually self-reinforcing crises. We've seen these critical nodes of instability everywhere we've looked.
From the fundamental internal battle over the U.S. national narrative and the existential threat to Federal Reserve independence,
to the perpetual frozen conflict in Ukraine, Europe's economic and political impossibility trilemma, and that massive looming AI investment bubble threatening global financial stability.
The core connection between all these seemingly discrete issues is so clear. Economic weakness and political uncertainty in the West, particularly the fiscal recklessness in the U.S. and the stagnation in Europe.
It prevents the necessary military buildup and sustainable aid that's needed for Ukraine. And this vacuum of strength enables geopolitical hostility from Russia and strategic maneuvering from China.
Which in turn drives domestic political polarization and further fiscal instability in the West. It's just a closed loop of instability.
So given the pervasive geopolitical drift and this profound internal battle over the U.S. past and future, the analysis suggests that the biggest instability for 2026 isn't necessarily a massive external war.
But the risk of internal fracture, both political and economic, particularly within the nations that previously anchored the global order.
The battle over who controls the past has truly become a battle for the very definition of reality itself.
We've given you the essential, distilled insights from what we think is the most crucial global forecast available. The question we want to leave you with, one that demands your ongoing attention as you navigate the year ahead, is this. Given this landscape of fragmented alliances and internal instability, what stands out to you as the biggest, most destabilizing risk factor for the year ahead?
Thank you for joining us on this extensive deep dive into the 2026 global trends. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on the Urban Herald.